listening to the Straight to Video podcast with Rob Lane.
Hey there, and welcome to episode 18 of the Straight to Video podcast. Hope everyone out there is doing okay. You're doing okay, right? I really enjoyed today's chat as it's with a guy who I really respect and admire, and more importantly, much like myself, someone who has an undying love for all things hard rock. Heck, let's use the term hair metal because it's a fun term, and that's what that music was all about. He's probably also the only person I know who has a playlist somewhere that has ABBA, Saxon, and Roxgang all back to back. On today's Straight to Video podcast, I'm speaking to singer-songwriter, multi-instrumentalist, and genius producer Linus Dotson, or Linus of Hollywood as some people may know him. Linus has released a whole series of killer power pop albums over the last 20 years or so. Prior to that, he had success in the pop-punk band Size 14. He's toured as bass player for Paul Gilbert and worked tirelessly with Bowling for Soup as producer and co-songwriter. The list just goes on and on. Today, he continues to produce albums and work on TV show themes, along with being a member of Nerf Herder, a killer photographer, and he also has a new synth pop band called Able Machines. But this guy is a hair metal nerd, and that's what I really love. We're talking about a genre which I don't think is ever going to be cool. That's fine. It stays our little secret, because when you get it, you really get it. Sure, it's cheesy, but with cheesy, it more often than not means fun, and the heart of it are some amazing songs, choruses, and melodies which Linus learned, took, and put into his music today. All the rest of those folks just don't realise it yet. It was really great to talk to Linus about growing up in Florida in the late 80s and early 90s before his move to California, where he literally became Linus of Hollywood. He takes us back to being that wide-eyed kid who got the chance to share stages with the guys he'd only seen in the pages of Metal Edge magazine, and he talks about how a shift in the music industry made him adapt but not compromise in having fun with his songwriting. I think you'll enjoy this one. If you want to find out more about Linus, then be sure to visit linusofhollywood.com, where you can find links to all his music and purchase his great albums. He's on Instagram and Twitter, both at Linus Dotson, and also please drop by at Linus Dotson Photo to support his photography work, and also his new band Able Machines, who you can find on Bandcamp and all the regular social media sites. So right now, just sit back and enjoy my chat with the brilliant Linus Dotson.
What's up?
How's it going, man?
I haven't seen you in a long time.
It's a long time. It's been a few years.
Last time I saw you had long hair. Look at you. You're all...
I know, this is the lockdown cut. I got tired of it and told the wife just to buzz it off.
It looks good, man.
Thank you.
I wish I had that hair. If I had that hair, I would look like Sebastian Bach. I would go down to my waist.
So, am I correct when I read you were born in Omaha, Nebraska, or is that a Wikipedia lie?
No, that's actually correct. My father was military, so there's a military base there. So when I was a kid, I moved around every 4 years, and I just happened to be born in Omaha, Nebraska.
Right.
But I don't have any memory of Nebraska. I think I was there from the ages of 0 to 1.
Right, and was that move essentially from there to Florida?
No, so I went from Omaha, Nebraska to College Station, Texas, to Belleville, Illinois, to Ames, Iowa. This is all before 6th grade, and then wound up in Florida when I was in 6th grade, and that's where I spent my teenage years.
So moving around so much when you was young, is the like positives and negatives to that? Do you think it kind of helped you in meeting new friends? It was never as, because that's a scary thing for most kids. If they're like stuck somewhere for so long, then, oh, you got to move here. It's like they're terrified. But if you're kind of used to the moving around.
Yeah, totally. I guess I just didn't know any different. And I guess in some ways it was sort of fun to like move to a new place every 4 years, and you can sort of reinvent yourself at school and no one knew who you were. And yeah, I think if I would have moved later, like when I was a teenager, it would have been a little more traumatic because I definitely had gotten into like a little scene and had my friends and all that. But when I was a younger kid, it didn't really bother me that much. I kind of liked the adventure of moving. Although most of the places that I lived before Florida weren't very exciting. Like, yeah, I'm moving to Iowa.
So whereabouts in Florida did you move to?
There is an Air Force base there called Patrick Air Force Base, and it's right near Cape Canaveral.
Right.
I don't know if you know anything about Florida, but there's like Cocoa Beach and Melbourne, and it's called the Space Coast. And I grew up in a very small town called Satellite Beach, and it was called Satellite Beach because rockets parts would actually wash up on shore from all the launches. Like you'd be walking down the beach and there'd just be like a big chunk of a rocket, and you would have to call the military base and they would come pick it up. It was kind of crazy, but it was a cool place to grow up. It was like basically like a small little island. You had to take a giant causeway to get there, and then the other side was the ocean. So it was like this little strip of land, and it was about 5 or 6 blocks. And on one side you had this big river, and on the other side you had the ocean. So my whole high school was either surfers. Like my middle brother was a professional surfer. He surfed with like Kelly Slater, and then I was a metalhead. Everyone was surfers or metalheads. Everyone had long hair. Like it was a very laid back kind of stoner beach vibe.
Sweet. So you got one brother or more than one brother and sister?
I have 2 older brothers.
Yeah. Did you look up to them? Were they kind of like your heroes or?
No. My childhood is like kind of strange because I really got into music. I think right when I moved into Florida, I was always into music, but I remember when I first moved to Florida, I got really into like Van Halen and Rush and Priest. I met some kid on the beach and he introduced me to all this stuff, and that's when I kind of knew like, this is what I want to do. And I just fully got into metal mode, and like by the time I was 15, I already had long hair and I was playing in a band, and we were playing clubs and opening up for Firehouse and Steelheart and all these bands. But basically, I love my family, but like I didn't really have a lot in common with them because I just got so into music, and I had my own group of friends. And I mean, I moved out of the house when I was 17 years old.
Right.
All I wanted to do was rock.
What do you think it was about just that chance meeting with, was it somebody you knew who introduced you? Or?
No, it was actually, I had just moved to Florida. My parents got a condo on the beach while we were having our house built. And I was like, literally, I mean, this was 5th grade or something, like, so how old was I? Like 10 or 12 or something like that. I was on the beach, like building a sandcastle. And this kid walked up and I started talking to him, and he's like, oh yeah, you should come over later. And so later on, I knocked on his door, his mom answers, and there's like all this noise coming from upstairs. And I'm like, hey, his name was Marshall. And I said, hey, is Marshall here? And he's like, and his mom's like, oh yeah, just follow the noise. And so I walk upstairs, and there's this kid, he's laying on his back and he's holding like an album, and he's got the giant speakers, like he's got basically a pillow. I actually learned this from him, and I used to do it when I was a kid. You lay on your back and you lay on a pillow, and you have your giant speakers like right by your head. And you just like sit in the middle of it. So I'm like, Marshall or whatever. And so anyway, he turned me on to, I think Van Halen 2 was like the record that I was just like, man, I want to do this now. Like,
yeah.
Cause I did really well in school. I like skipped a grade. I was in all gifted classes. So like, I think I wanted to be like an architect or a chemist or something. But as soon as I heard Van Halen and Rush and Iron Maiden and all that, I was like, man, I think I want to do this. Much to my parents, they were pretty bummed out.
Isn't it crazy? I've spoke to so many people. It's either having brothers and sisters who are a couple of years older have a massive influence, or just like these chance meetings with somebody that say, oh, listen to this. And it just kind of totally changes the direction. It's insane. It really is. When
I did that last tour with Nerf Herder and Bowling for Soup, I was in Florida, and that guy, I still talk to him. He came out to the show and he was telling everybody, he's like, he wouldn't be playing this show if it weren't for me. I'm the one that.
So good. And he must love that as well.
Totally. Yeah, I tell him all the time.
So what kind of music was floating around prior to that? Was it just chart music?
My first favorite band was The Police. I loved The Police. I mean, I was obsessed. Like, I used to actually buy like Tiger Beat magazine and all that, and like cut my hair like Sting, and wore the like a sweatshirt like his in the Every Little Thing She Does Is Magic video. I was just like super, super obsessed. I loved a lot of stuff that had like reggae flavor to it. So like I loved Musical Youth, like Pass the Dutchie, Adam and the Ants. I really loved. I dressed like him for like Halloween. So like that was like the kind of stuff I liked prior to metal.
Mm-hmm. Was that MTV influence, do you think?
Very MTV influence. Yeah, 100%. I even though I think I was in Iowa when MTV came out, but I had it from like like right when it came out. And I would just sit there and watch it. It was so great because it'd be like Elvis Costello and then Iron Maiden. You know what I mean? Like the variety was amazing and you just never knew what was coming next.
Yeah.
And it was so much fun.
And it was just on in the background as well, so it's kind of probably subconsciously sinking into your head as well.
I don't know. That was back when you really engaged with music. So like,
yeah, because
now you just sort of put on music and you're doing other stuff. But like, I used to sit in front of the TV and watch MTV like it was a TV show. And same with records. I used to sit there with the lyric sheet and listen to records and like look at all the credits. And, you know, I feel like people, including myself, don't engage with music on that level anymore that people did back then.
No.
I don't know why that is. I guess there's just so much stimulus now.
So did lots of many touring bands come through your town in Florida?
In Florida, yeah. Like there was a bunch of clubs. And when I was a teenager, well, my parents would only let me go see one concert a month. So I ended up sneaking out like a lot because the shows wouldn't even start till 10 or 11. And so I would wait till they go to bed. I'd call my friend. I'd climb out my window, hop in the car. Basically all those like late 80s, early 90s, like I call it the metal edge era. You know that magazine? Mm-hmm. So like all those bands came through my town, like all of them, like even the most like Babylon AD and Wild Side and Taiketo and, you know, like all those kind of bands that they came through Melbourne. So, and I was friends with the club owner. And so either my band would get to open up for them or he would say, I'll let you in, because I was underage. He'd be like, I'll let you into the club if you help the band load in.
Right.
That was the other funny thing is so I'd be like loading in for Gwar or like all these bands or whatever because I could get in if I helped them load in.
But you'd have probably helped them load in anyway because you were a fan of that.
Oh yeah, well I just wanted to go to any concert. I mean, I was like loading in for Steel Pulse and like reggae bands, like whoever in Shabba Ranks, like whoever was playing there. I was like, I want to go see this, so I would definitely do what I had to do to get in. So I saw all those bands.
What was the kind of atmosphere like? Because I was going to ask you about Metal Edge anyway, because that was my freaking Bible when I was getting into music. And to imagine seeing those bands back then would have blown my mind. So what was the atmosphere like in those shows?
It was amazing. I mean, it was kind of weird because the market that I was in was pretty small. So there were some bands that were well known because they were on MTV. So like if, you know, I remember Danger Danger came through and Naughty Naughty had just come out. So like it was packed for that. Enough's Enough came through. It was pretty packed for that. But sometimes a band would come through and I knew who they were because I was obsessed, but no one else did. So like I remember the first time Life, Sex, and Death came through.
Right.
There was no one there. There was like 5 people there and I was one of them. And they did their full show. And the 5 people that were there were just like, what is happening right now? And we told 100 people, like, you're not going to believe what we saw.
Yeah.
And the next time they came through, it was like sold out just based on our word of mouth from 5 people because we just couldn't believe what we just saw. But just in general, man, I just love, you would just go see these bands. Like, you know, they're playing a small club like the size of the Whiskey or something, basically, but they would play it like it was an arena, mm-hmm. You know, like you remember seeing Danger Danger and they're like, you know, they have all these lights and there's huge background vocals and like you would just be sitting there going like, this is amazing because you forget that you're in a small club. Yeah. You feel like you're in Madison Square Gardens or something. So everything was so larger than life and it was fun to like get dressed up and all the girls were hot and you smell the Aquanet in the air and the ice fog and the you know, I don't know, I loved that era so much and it was very when it all ended I walked around in a daze for like 3 years trying to figure out what I was going to do next.
I don't know where I heard it. I only heard it recently, but somebody said that the first 2 years of the next decade are the best years of the previous decade. So such as like 90 to 92 were like the best of the 80s, which for me, when I think of the kind of bands I like, I'm like, yeah, that's when all the bands were at the peak, which I was loving it, which it kind of gets looked down on for me, but I agree with that. I think that's all my favorite stuff.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I definitely think some of it got a little watered down, but you know, if it would have kept going, there was some bands that you like, man, I wish I could have heard more from Vane, or I wish I could have heard more from Life, Sex, and Death, or like there's just some of those bands you're like, man, if they only had another couple albums, you know, like.
So where did you hear Life, Sex, and Death?
That was one of those shows I just decided to go because I saw the picture and there was some long-haired dudes in the band and I was like, what's going on with that singer? So I just like went and I just couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
Basically, they were like a typical rock hair metal band, but their singer looked and acted like a unhoused person, as we say in Los Angeles, a homeless person. He didn't shower. He wore a suit. he talked really weird and insane, and he would stay in character. So the whole time you're just going, is this guy for real? Like, or is this an act? And he would do the act so well that no one could figure it out. So we would just stay up late talking, like arguing about, no, man, it's got to be an act. And because, they would pull up in the truck and he would be sitting out in the truck, like rocking back and forth and talking to himself, like just off in the distance. And then like when he played My Town, he took a dump behind the PA system, but it wasn't part of the show. They found it the next day. You know what I mean? So like that stuff would happen, and you'd be like, see, it isn't an act because that wasn't part of the show. He just did that. And they're just one of those bands that I always think about when I think about word of mouth and how powerful it is when you put on an amazing show.
Yeah.
I just think about how 5 people at that show literally told the whole town, and then it was sold out the next time they came through. It was not based on radio play or MTV or anything. It was just everyone in town going, you got to see this thing.
So good. So I heard you was kind of initially into heavier music, then you began to like gravitate more to the radio friendly stuff. Did the fact that girls like that music more help a little bit?
100%. Yeah. And also just as I got better at music and just got into songwriting, I mean, even the heavier stuff I liked, there was like melodic stuff that I was gravitating towards. Yeah. And I think I recognized that. And then when I started playing in my first metal band, I mean, we probably weren't even good enough to be playing Iron Maiden. So we would play songs that were really easy, like Heaven's on Fire by Kiss. And, just things like that just had really simple riffs. And then Bon Jovi was actually a big turning point because like when Slippery and Wet came out, I was just like, wow, this is really great. And the other guitar player in my band, we sort of dissected their songs and figured out harmonies and sort of how they were writing these songs. Like that, they really, I've said it in interviews before that Bon Jovi was my Beatles, and some people like scoff at that, but that really was the band that made me dissect songcraft and figure out what makes a hit song, what makes a good arrangement, taught me about harmonies and all that kind of stuff. I will always give them props for that.
Are you a big Desmond Child fan then?
Yeah, he sounds like an interesting guy. I mean, it was back in the metal years too. Like another one, the funny thing is, remember when they had singles?
Yep.
And they were like cassette singles. So I drove this like crappy like Ford Escort. That was my first car. And I used to buy singles, but I would keep them under my seat. And I would only listen to them when I was by myself. If my metal friends were in my car, they'd be like, okay, see you later. And I would like take out, whatever metal thing I was listening to. And I would reach under my seat. And most of the stuff I had under my seat was like Desmond Child songs. Like there was that Michael Bolton song. It was like, how can we be lovers if we be friends? I was like, that song is so good. And, I just had a bunch of like those kind of hit songs like Diane Warren, Desmond Child. And I don't think I realized that all those songs were written by the same people. They just had this thing that I liked.
This magical sugary formula, which kind of gets in the head.
Yeah, totally. I was listening to Rat. They had that album Detonator. Mm-hmm. You know that album very well?
That's all Desmond Child stuff, right?
Yeah, well, there's some stuff on there. But Diane Warren wrote a song called Giving Yourself Away. And it's such a great song. I love it so much. I think Rat like hates that album, but man, I love it. And Kane Roberts. Remember Kane Roberts?
Yeah.
I think he had a good Desmond Child song on his record.
I even got Desmond Child's solo album.
Oh man, before like he wrote all the hits?
I think it must have been like around 1990 or something like that. It looks really cool on the front with his long hair. And there's a song called Love on a Rooftop, which is so good. It's like proper mega Desmond Child hit.
That's awesome. I've seen some of his old records and it was like Desmond Child and Rouge or something like that. And he was very like glammed out, kind of in a Bowie way. Can't deny his songwriting, man.
So when you first began to play in bands, was there a strong music scene, or was you just kind of hopping onto all these bands which were passing through?
There kind of was. I mean, when I look back on it, I kind of marvel because the town I grew up in was pretty small, but there were a lot of bands, like a lot of sort of bands doing the club circuit. In the 80s, it was kind of unreasonable to think that a record executive was going to walk into some small bar in Florida and sign you, but there were bands getting signed. I mean, Rock's Gang, Juliet, Saigon Kick was from Miami. So there were some bands around and we were like going like, oh, people are getting signed. Like this is their time, whatever. But yeah, it was kind of a crazy scene. We would like hop on little mini tours and we opened up for some really big bands and play. I mean, we opened up for Foghat and there was like 2,000 people there. And like,
wow.
We were just kids. And we were just like, this is amazing.
So you say open for, would you say Steelheart you open for?
Yeah, we opened for Steelheart. We opened up for Firehouse. I mean, pretty much like you go down a list of all those bands.
Yeah.
Like,
How was that for you then? If you were like looking at these bands in magazines, and yeah, you can come and open up for them.
Oh, it was amazing. It was crazy. We were like literally 15 or 16 years old, so we would just be sitting there, and like South Gang would walk in. We'd be like, "Oh my god!" Or like Danger, all these bands that we loved, and yeah, it was cool. And they were all usually really nice and supportive. And a lot of times we had to leave after we played because we were so young.
Right. You can play, get some people in, but now you got to go. It's like, shit.
Yeah, they rush us out the back of the thing. We'd just be like looking over the railing or whatever. But yeah, it was cool.
So what kind of band was you modeling yourselves on around that time?
I don't know. We were kind of weird. It's funny if you listen to... I guess if you listen to some of our old demos, it almost sounds like early Size 14, which is like my first pop punk band. But I'm trying to think of like what would be a band that we definitely went through our Bon Jovi phase, but we sort of evolved. Do you remember there was a band called The Zeros, and they were a glam band? So I was obsessed with them, and they had this album where like the first song was like a intro, like where they introduced them and they sang all their names and stuff. So I briefly had this band called Bubblegum, and we basically just ripped off The Zeros, and we had an intro song and an exit song and all that. And I remember them being a big influence. And it was kind of cool because no one in my town knew who they were. So it was kind of like our secret thing that we were like, we know this cool LA band.
Yeah, this blueprint you could like take little nuggets from.
Totally. And I actually, when I first moved to LA, they were still playing, and I got to see them at this club called the Coconut Teaser, where they sort of made that club famous. They had it painted purple and all that.
Yeah. So moving on to when you moved to Hollywood, that must have been a really big deal and a huge life-changing moment. What kind of set that in motion?
I think it was that feeling, I was working at Subway sandwich shop, and I mean, I had been playing in this band since I was a teenager, and we won all the Battle of the Bands, and we opened up for these big bands, and we put out a couple cassettes, and it just felt like, at that time it was before the internet and MySpace and all that. So it just felt like if I ever want to do something with music, I've got to go to somewhere. And I was always obsessed with LA for obvious reasons. So I literally moved in with a friend of a friend. I had a suitcase and an acoustic guitar, and I'd never even flown on a plane before. So my first plane flight was from Florida to Los Angeles. When I look back at that, I was like, wow, that actually took a lot of balls. I came out, and it was 1994 when I moved out. And at that time, I didn't really know what I wanted to do because it was Pearl Jam and Nirvana and all that, which I liked, but I wasn't really connecting to it. I liked the whole larger than life fun aspect of hair metal. And I was just kind of like, these songs aren't really that good, and they're not like putting on a show. And then I remember that summer, Green Day, Dookie came out, and Weezer Blue Album came out, and I was just like, okay, I can do this. It's like power chords, guitar solos, great songs, fun, energy. And so I like shaved my head and started Size 14. and we ended up getting signed pretty quick. So it worked.
Did you form that band with people you knew, or just people you met once you actually got at it?
It was literally, I actually answered an ad there was a magazine called The Recycler, which is like the thing you would call that's where you buy used guitars and stuff like that. And some guy had put an ad in looking for someone for his band. And then I got together with him, and I had been writing all these songs. And so I just said like, well, you can play in my band and I'll play in your band. And then my band ended up taking off. But the guitar player was like my roommate that I met at my telemarketing job. You know what I mean? It's just like just people that were around. But no, I didn't know anybody when I moved out here. So I just kind of found people.
That's an even extra ballsier move, just moving out to Hollywood and like not knowing anybody and just jumping in feet first.
Well, it was also funny because my first job was a telemarketing job, and most of the people that worked there were also people from Metal Edge magazine.
Yes. Well, I was going to ask, was there anyone from that hard rock scene from the 80s and 90s who you bumped into once you arrived in Hollywood?
It was a weird time, too, because they didn't want to be acknowledged for that. Like at one time I met Christy Crash Majors from Pretty Boy Floyd at the Viper Room, and this was probably in like the mid-90s, and I think at that time he became like an A&R guy or some sort of industry. And a friend of mine introduced, he said, hey, Linus, this is my friend Chris Majori or whatever he was going by at that time. And he sort of whispered in my ear, like, he was in Pretty Boy Floyd. And I go, so like, I'm like, my teenage kid comes out. I was just like, oh my God, dude, I love Pretty Boy. And he was literally just like, shh.
Wow.
Like didn't want to acknowledge it. So that was kind of funny. Like I remember going to see Nuno Betancourt had this band called Population Zero that was playing at the time. And I'm like, I'm going to go see Nuno shred. And I went to see his band and they were good, but he was doing the thing that we were all doing, which is like pretending like we didn't know how to play guitar kind of thing, you know? And so he wasn't really shredding like he could. And
isn't that crazy that something can have such an effect? Because I don't think that'd happen now.
Yeah, I mean, I was doing the same thing. I grew up like learning Paul Gilbert solos and all that kind of stuff. And I remember purposely trying to play guitar sloppily. And if I played a solo, I would not use vibrato.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like on purpose, because everyone's listening to Pavement and Blur and all these bands. And the idea is like, you don't want to give away that you can actually play guitar.
Mad. So did your songwriting just evolve naturally once you heard like Green Day and stuff? Because you were listening to stuff like Jellyfish as well, which was kind of at around the time of the hard rock bands, which we love. But Jellyfish was a little bit more retro-y and a little bit more experimental.
Jellyfish was my catalyst into the Beatles and the Beach Boys and the Zombies and like real classic songwriting, which I didn't really hear much of when I was a kid. Like I knew the Beach Boys from the Sun-Kissed commercial, Good Vibrations, or, you know, like you would see these songs on TV, Surfing USA, but I always thought of it as like, oh, that's hokey or whatever. And then when Jellyfish came out, I remember I joined their fan club and the singer, Andy Sturmer, had a list of his top 5 favorite albums. And it was Rubber Soul, Pet Sounds, Sail Away by Randy Newman, Odyssey and Oracle by the Zombies. So I went to the record store and I bought all these records and I remember putting them on. And I remember putting on Pet Sounds and I was just like, oh, that's where they got all this stuff from. You know, like, I mean, they did it amazingly. But like at that time, they were playing to a whole generation of kids who had never really heard that stuff in that manner. You know what I mean? And they were kind of like Enough's Enough in that, like, I saw them on Headbangers Ball and they all had long hair. So I just go like, oh, this is like a hard rock band, but they kind of weren't. They were like more than that. You know what I mean? So that was the catalyst. So even when I was doing Size 14 and there was the whole Green Day Weezer thing going on, I was listening to more and more of that 60s stuff and knowing that was like the sort of pinnacle of songwriting. So I think anything that I have done in my life since I heard Jellyfish has always had a little more melody and pop sensibility to it, no matter if it was a pop punk thing or my solo stuff.
Sweet. So at what point did you meet Paul Gilbert? Because obviously you got to play with him.
I was in Japan and I was doing a solo show.
Right.
And the stage manager came back and said, hey, do you know Paul Gilbert? And I'm like, yeah, from Mr. Big. And he's like, yeah. And he was like, he's here to see you.
What?
And I'm like, what are you talking about? And so I go, tell him to come back here and say hi. So the stage manager went and got him. This is before the show. And he came back and he's like, oh, hey, nice to meet you. And I'm like, dude, I'm such a big fan. You know, I don't have a problem telling someone I'm a big fan of them.
No.
I mean, I sat there when I was a kid learning his solos and stuff. So we started talking about pop music because I didn't know what a pop geek he was. And he loved, there's a band called Delamitri that's like my favorite band. And he knew Delamitri. We were playing Time to Let You Go by Enough's Enough. We like picked up guitars and just started playing backstage. And I realized like, wow, this guy knows all these pop bands that I love. So at the end of the night, you know, when you play in Japan, they do this thing where every band gets up on stage at the end and you play a song together. So I was playing with this girl and the song was Don't Go Breaking My Heart by Elton John and Kiki D. And so we told Paul, like, you should learn the song and come up and play with us. So he did. And of course he's huge in Japan. So everyone in the audience was like, how did this happen? And we ended up going, he took me to go see a Beatles tribute band called the Parrots that are amazing. And we just became really good friends. The reason he was there was because I covered an Ozzy Osbourne song called Goodbye to Romance on my second album. And the editor from Burn Magazine, which is like a big metal magazine there, just told Paul, like, you got to see this guy. He's like, and I think that night I played Beth by Kiss. I played Before the Dawn by Judas Priest. I had that in my set for some reason. And I was like, I always like to sort of show these other genres that have such melodic sensibility to them when you present them in that way. You know what I mean? Like I did a Smoking Popes song on one of my albums too. And it was just like, because I could just picture that. It's such a classic sounding song, you know? So anyway, I just became really good friends with Paul. He asked me to produce his album called Burning Organ. And so I stayed at his house for like 6 weeks when he lived in Vegas. And he didn't really know that he knew me as like a power pop dude. And I think he figured out as we were doing that record that I knew how to shred a little bit. So when he did his next album, he actually asked me to play bass. And it was super fun because I hadn't exercised those shred muscles in a long time. And the drummers in that band, Marco on the album, and then this guy Jeff Bowders that I toured with. It was super fun. I toured with him for a couple years and got to go all over the world, Asia, South America. My passport got super full that year, and he's just such a nice human being. So it was a good experience.
So when you arrived in Hollywood, was there any band which you saw? Obviously, the music scene's all changing and all this kind of stuff. But was there any band which you got to see live where you thought, holy shit, this is where it's at?
I saw a lot of bands. I mean, in LA, it was a fun time because a band would start to break, but they wouldn't be huge yet. So you had the opportunity. Like, I remember I saw Avril Lavigne at the Viper Room. I saw Third Eye Blind at the Viper Room. Like all these bands that were about to be huge, but they weren't yet. And so I have a lot of memories of seeing those kind of bands. But I think when I first moved to LA, there was a night on Monday night at the Whiskey. It was called Bianca's Hole. And it was like a free night. And this was back when the Weezer thing was happening. So all those bands that were connected to Weezer would play for free. So there was a band called That Dog that would play, and some lesser known bands, like there's a band called Super Sport 2000 that I loved. One of those girls ended up being in the Rentals. It was just there's such a scene when I moved to LA, and it was all that kind of Weezery kind of stuff, and it was just so cool. So I would just go there and sort of absorb it all, and it just seemed so cool and huge to me. But I don't know if I can pinpoint one particular holy shit moment. It was pretty much all holy shit.
Yeah. Is there one thing about Hollywood that still kind of grabs your heartstrings, which would have perhaps blown your teenage self's mind, or is it still cool to see these places? Because I would imagine Hollywood's changing quite a bit now, regardless of the pandemic, but I hear they're just kind of putting hotels up everywhere. And
Yeah, it's definitely getting, I don't mind change, but they're starting to put up all those like 3-story buildings that are like the condos are in the top and the retail's in the bottom, and everything is starting to kind of look the same. And that's what I moved there to get away from. But it's still, I don't know, the thing that I loved about Hollywood is just the energy of everyone that moves there is trying to sort of pursue a dream. And my studio had like a coffee shop downstairs. So you go get a coffee and people are working on their screenplay and they're on the phone talking to them, and I guess some people like witness that stuff and think that it's kind of douchey or whatever, but I really thrive on it. I think it's so cool that people come from all over the country to kind of like get their hustle on, and I thrive on that energy. Like everyone else is doing stuff, I better do something too. I will always love Hollywood. There's just like a special je ne sais quoi to it. There's parts of it that are so beautiful and epic and larger than life. And then it's also really shitty and dirty and gross too. And I like the combination. Whenever I moved to Pasadena briefly and it was a little too clean for me. Like I like a little bit of grit, Hollywood still feels like a bus could pull up and Axl Rose could walk off of it with this piece of straw in his mouth, like I just love that feeling.
Is there anything you still have to tick off about being a musician in Hollywood to satisfy the hard rock kid in you? Is there a venue you've still not played or a band which has escaped you?
Oh man, that's a good question. I think I'd love to play the Hollywood Bowl at some point.
Right. I've
had some friends, that's a big place obviously, but I've had some friends that kind of get in there as an opening act, or they're playing with someone or whatever. I think that would be a bucket list thing to play there. I feel like I played most of the clubs.
Is there a club which you miss?
A club that I miss?
As in which is not open anymore?
Oh, that's a good question. Let me think about that for a second. The Coconut Teaser was fun. That was the first club that I played when I moved to Los Angeles. That place closed down a long time ago.
Because what's where the Key Club is? Because that's gone now, right? What's that?
Oh, yeah. That one, that place has been weird. It was like called something else for a while. It was Gazzari's back in the hair metal days, and then it turned into the Key Club, and then now it's like a dance club or something like that. And there was a club in Silver Lake called Spaceland that we used to play at a lot, that's gone. And Size 14 used to play at the Dragonfly. That was kind of our headquarters, and that was on Santa Monica Boulevard. And I saw Rage Against the Machine play there and Sugar Ray, and it was like a really tiny club. So yeah, I guess that one probably. We had some good times at that place.
You probably missed the Cat House then, didn't you, by the time you moved to Hollywood?
Yeah, that was already gone. That is my one regret. It would have been nice to move there like in 1988 rather than 1994, because I totally missed the heyday, the decline of the Western civilization part 2. But I had a friend in Florida who used to get all the magazines, like Rock City News and BAM and all that. He'd bring it back and we would just sit there and like look through it all and be like, wow.
Great, man. Well, thank you ever so much for that. I appreciate that. It was lovely to catch up and hear some stories.
Yeah, thanks for letting me ramble.
Nice one. You enjoy the rest of your day, mate, and lovely to see you.
All right, thanks, Rob. Good talking to you.
it up. Don't fuck it up. We got a good thing going. Baby, don't fuck it up. Don't fuck it up. We got a good thing going. Baby, don't fuck it up. Don't fuck it up.
Thanks so much to Linus for speaking to the Straight to Video podcast and for all the cool hard rock stories. I really loved hearing all that stuff. Be sure to find Linus and his various projects all over social media or at linusofhollywood.com. Please keep spreading the word about the Straight to Video podcast. We're quickly heading towards almost 20 episodes of this show. It's gone so quick and I want to keep building and building on everything you're helping make happen. As always, thanks so much for listening. Please keep checking back for new episodes and spreading the good word to anyone you think might also enjoy it. I've been your host, Rob Lane, and until next time, look after yourselves and speak real soon.